Hey everybody, I'm Joe, and around here we like to talk about monsters. Specifically, we take a look at monsters for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We talk about running them as part of a larger story. We talk about their abilities in combat. We talk about homebrewing them. And today, I want to take a look at 4 attributes of a monster that I'm paying attention to when I want to put it into my campaign. Not just as a monster in a random encounter, but as something that I'm going to use inside of a small story arc or even a larger one. What things make it exciting as an element of the story? I've said before that the monster you choose is your best ability to push your story forward, to drive the narrative of your campaign. It's the thing you have the most control over. So monster selection matters, and there are 4 attributes that I think we need to be paying attention to when making these selections. So let's get started. The first attribute is the lore of the monster. Now, this is skipped over so often. When you flip open the monster manual or Monsters of the Multiverse, you're going to see that there's lore printed and then the stat block. And a lot of people skip over the lore and go straight to the stat block and see, what does this thing do in combat? And that's really a shame, because the lore tells you, what is this thing? How does it operate? What does it want? How does it fit into the environment? What's its culture? And all of these things can be exciting for you to explore as story elements in the game. And to examine how powerful lore can be when building a story, we're going to take a look at the Medusa. So you can find the Medusa on page 214 of the Monster Manual. And this monster has everything that I love in lore and in backstory that can drive the actions of the monster to create interesting stories. Because remember, the monsters are in constant action off screen. So what do we know about the Medusa? Men and women who desire eternal youth, beauty, and adoration might pray to malicious gods, beg dragons for ancient magic, or seek out powerful archmages to fulfill their wishes. Others may sacrifice to demon lords or archdevils, offering all in exchange for this gift, oblivious to the curse that accompanies it. So we have vain people who want to be young and beautiful forever, and they pray to some sort of a god or godlike being, and they are tricked. And instead of getting youth and beauty forever, they get this horrifying visage forever. And then we read Medusa layers. Medusas live forever in seclusion, alienated from the world around them by their monstrous form. So what happens to someone who lives forever in isolation? Well, the answer is they go crazy. Because why do you want to be young and beautiful? Why do you want to be beautiful? It is partly for yourself and partly so that other people can see you. Medusas want to be seen as beautiful, and now they can no longer be seen by anybody. What would a Medusa do in order to be seen again, in order to be part of the world again? Who would they pray to? What wouldn't they destroy or give up or sacrifice? The Medusa creates a compelling monster that honestly our characters can feel a little bit bad for. And running them as this creature, constantly trying to regain a sense of normalcy, that prayed to the wrong god, that was tricked, they are fantastically interesting. So the second attribute I'm looking at are the non-combat abilities of the monster. A lot of abilities are, of course, combat abilities, and that's very important in 5th edition, in D&D, generally speaking. But the non-combat abilities tell you something about the monster. What is it? How does it work? And they tell you a lot about how to run this thing, how it interacts with others and with the environment. And that can be really exciting, and it adds a lot of flavor to the monster. So to give you an example of that, we're going to take a look at the Bodic. So when we take a look at abilities of a monster, these are things they just simply can do, and abilities are differentiated from spells in that abilities can't be counterspelled. And my favorite monster ability comes from the Bodic. This is a challenge rating 6 monster. If you have Volo's Guide to Monsters, this is on page 126, and if you're using Monsters of the Multiverse, it is on page 64. And what I'm about to look at was originally labeled as an ability called Unhallowed Fragments. It has been taken out of that ability context for Monsters of the Multiverse, but I still want to use it because it is a fantastically interesting ability. And it's right here. This is from Monsters of the Multiverse. It's broken out differently in Volo's, but Bodics are extensions of Orcus's will outside the abyss, serving the demon prince's aims and other minions. Orcus can recall anything a Bodic sees or hears. If he so chooses, he can speak through a Bodic to address his enemies and followers directly. This is wonderful story building abilities here. What's the main problem that we have with big bad evil guys in campaigns? The second they show up, our heroes want to attack them. And also, why would our big bad evil guy not just kill our heroes when they're in the same room? So we don't have our big bad evil guys in front of our characters, but that means they don't get a sense that the bad guys are constantly working, are constantly trying to achieve something. So this off-screen enemy loses any sense of importance. But when you have a Bodic, all of a sudden the ability to drive the story forward becomes relevant, because this god of undeath, Orcus, can speak through a lower level monster. Giving the ability of your main villain to speak through someone else means that you can have your villain communicate with the players, drive the plot forward, but also not be on screen to accidentally TPK your party way too early. The Bodic's ability here, which, as I said, was originally called Unhallowed Fragments, is fantastically interesting stuff. We're going to take a look at the final 2 attributes together. The first is non-combat spellcasting. So most spells that monsters have are combat-oriented spells, and that's totally appropriate. We do expect most interactions with monsters eventually to come to initiative. But you will find semi-regularly monsters with non-combat spells. Spells that have no place in combat, such as Detect Thoughts, or maybe even spells that take longer than an action to cast. And when you find these in a stat block, they tell you something about how the monster operates. We need to think about monsters as characters that exist off screen that are simultaneously trying to get what they want. The lore tells you something about what they want, and the non-combat spells tell you about their strategies to get what they want. So these are really worth paying attention to, and if you run this monster, make sure you use these spells. Simultaneously, I want to take a look at vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And here we have something that is very rarely used in a lot of monster stat blocks. And I think that's a shame. Very few monsters have damage vulnerabilities in 5th edition. And even fewer have weaknesses, which are things that they can't do well or can't do at all. But these 2 things tell you something about what the monster tries to avoid, and they also operate as a puzzle for your players. Here's what I mean by that. You have a monster, you put it in front of your players and its initiative, And if they simply view the monster as a sack of hit points to be depleted, then every monster they approach in the same way. But what if the monster doesn't regain hit points when it is subjected to fire damage? What if it is vulnerable to psychic damage? Now your players view the monster as a puzzle to be solved, and each combat is different from every other because the puzzle itself and the thing they are trying to solve is different, not just the environment. So vulnerabilities and weaknesses can be really useful. And to take a look at vulnerabilities and weaknesses and non-combat spells, I want to take a look at the vampire. So lastly, we are taking a look at the vampire, and we're taking a look at the vampire as opposed to the vampire spawn. And we're taking a look specifically at pages 297 and 298 of the Monster Manual. So the vampire has a variant that is the Vampire Warrior or the Vampire Spellcaster. And let's go ahead and take a look at the spells that the vampire gets. Now, there's some that are definitively combat-oriented spells. Sleep, invisibility, mirror image. These are going to be combat spells. But let's take a look at other things inside of here. Comprehend languages, non-detection, gust of wind, detect thoughts. Why are these spells in here? These are in here to give flavor and to give a sense of how the vampire operates. You cast comprehend languages to understand what's going on. You use non-detection to operate in the shadows. We use detect thoughts in order to allow our vampire to know what the players or other NPCs are doing. The vampire is someone who is operating intelligently and surreptitiously in order to get what he wants. And taking a look at the spells here tells you how we are going to use the vampire and run them as an ongoing character. But I also said that the vampire was a great opportunity to take a look at weaknesses. They have a whole section on weaknesses. And I do believe that monsters have fewer susceptibilities to types of damage or other conditions or other situations than really would be nice, because I view them as puzzles. But the vampire is harmed by running water, has light hypersensitivity. We have these specific weaknesses that the vampire has to operate around. But when we take a look at forbiddance, for instance, a vampire can't enter a residence without an invitation from one of the occupants. That's not a combat weakness, that is a lifestyle weakness. This tells us how to run the vampire. And so taking a look at weaknesses or homebrewing them into monsters yourself and taking a look at the non-combat spells really rounds out the monster as a character. So this has been a look at non-combat attributes that help you build interesting stories around monsters. What are the things to look for and how to utilize them? I hope it's been helpful. I hope it gets you generating some ideas on how to build more interesting and elaborate stories for your players. As always, YouTube is made out of buttons. Do what you do, and I look forward to seeing you next time. All right, bye.